David Tulis.
Yes, 800-8949, 800-8949 if you would like to be on the program today. David Tulis. I'm holding in my hand a very large green volume, one of my set in the hallway, loaded with books, groaning with books, and this set is about 160 volumes, and that's called American Jurisprudence. I've been reading a 100-page chapter on a remedy called quo warranto. What's neat about quo warranto is that it lets you, the citizen, become the state. You enter into a claim against the good people, if you will, in government, perhaps locally, or based in Nashville, and you become the state of Tennessee, and you are demanding the authority for a particular act to have been done, or a particular custom that is running aground the rights of innocent, harmless Americans who are first, I should say, Tennessee citizens and perhaps residents of Chattanooga, or maybe residents of Hamilton County, or your county if you are from a far place. We do welcome you here to Nooga Radio. The discussion is exciting because quo warranto, like a petition of writ of mandamus, which is another one, or the petition for writ of habeas corpus, are ancient common law rights that come to common people from the Magna Carta, back when King John was forced by the lords to sign limits against his executive power. And that's always the danger, executive power. And thanks to Christianity and the Reformation, inspired by the wondrous works of John Calvin and Martin Luther and John Knox and others, we have limits on power, limits on the pretensions to be God by kings, and also by presidents, by governors as well. And these powers are reserved to the people, and you find out about them in dull law books of the kind that I just love having, and which I collect, and I read as much as I can in them. So quo warranto is 100 pages. I'm probably on about page 20 on the general principles of quo warranto. And it lets you, the listener, if you have a grievance, right? If you have a problem, you don't even have to be involved in litigation or a criminal act or criminal prosecution to use this remedy. You become the state of Tennessee, and the case is styled, which means to say the name of the case would be State of Tennessee ex rel John Doe. Okay, that's you. And the word ex rel means on the relation of. So what happens is in this remedy is you take the position of the state. You become the representative of not the people, but the state itself. So State of Tennessee ex rel John Doe, that's you, the David Tulis listener, and then you file it against someone who's acting outside of his authority. And this is a rampant problem today, and yet very few people know about this remedy. And it could be that it's just a wet dream that anyone would use it. Okay, I was told by David Merlin in an interview recently that my idea of this sort of remedy written into our law in Tennessee is just a wet dream, something that is unfulfillable and is naive and childish, and it just causes a mess. And yet I think I mentioned it because I like the idea and I want to read up on it, but also because it doesn't really solve the main problem, which is why we're here at Nooga Radio and on the David Tulis program. The problem is greater than any one remedy might bring about in the case of one person, or in the case of a mass tort, a mass crime against the people of Tennessee or the county, right? These are being done, okay? These are not just on the federal level, but I dare say on the state level as well. A kind of mass crime. It's not actually a crime unless you want to call it oppression a crime. There is, of course, in Tennessee law, a thing called the oppression statute, and that's when you're abused by a person who's under the color of law, under a uniform, under a pretense of authority, who's acting really in his own capacity, right, in his own personal capacity, and that's called oppression. And the trigger for that to be shown is knowingly and intentionally doing these things. So there is a way of making the party know that he's intentionally violating your rights by a process called administrative notice. Okay, so that is how you establish that he knows what the law is, because you've given him notice administratively. There is oppression, and And the main problem that we face is being an oppressed people here, even here in Chattanooga, even here in Hamilton County, though we don't know it, right? We think we're free. I know my mother, 94, keeps looking at me with bewilderment when I say, well, Mom, we're not free. She thinks that we live in a great country. And she's an immigrant and thinks we live in a great free country. And though she reads the paper every day, 2 newspapers, in fact, she hasn't been alerted to the fact that we have great lawlessness in the land and great violence in the land, though you can't see it unless you know how to define it, right? You have to define it properly, and then you can see it. And that's what we're doing here on the David Tulis program. The remedy to these, to the larger question, there may be a particular remedy that needs to be filed in court by you or some other good and innocent and oppressed person who's concerned about a major problem, okay? But the larger question is really, what can we do today, right? What can we do today? What can we do if you're just like everybody else who's just doing the regular thing, right? What are the regular things we need to be doing, and how can we work toward the same end? Now, this other work, not the legal work I'm talking about, but the other work that's apart from American jurisprudence, or the Tennessee version, which is called Tennessee jurisprudence. There's a chapter there, I'm pretty sure, as well. I've got to go down to UTC to find out what it says. Aside from these legal remedies, there is the spiritual work of rebuilding, and that entails suspicion in one direction and confidence in another. The suspicion, I suggest, be directed against the state itself and all those systems, including advertising and the media, which enhance the state, enhance your sense of unease, and create fear. Right? If we're fearful, we will want the state to bring security. That's why the whole gig city is going down. It's smoking. It's under heavy flack from very well-intentioned people who want to prevent the free market from operating in Chattanooga. And the city council seems to be agreeing with that side. And the marketplace is a picture of liberty, right? If there's a free market and there is a genuine even playing field in Chattanooga, we will have prosperity and blessing. There'll be fewer killings of unborn children, fewer killings of innocent people. There'll be a way that even gang members can find a way of serving other people rather than just serving themselves, right? Those are internal spiritual problems that are addressable only by, you might say, only by religion, okay? There's only a theological answer to these problems. These problems cannot be answered by sociology or by administrative law or funding of programs. One more program. How many programs do we have in Chattanooga? If you collect newspapers for the past 10 years and go do a search on every program, private or public-private, there are probably thousands of them, each trying to solve some problem by administering money and time and people's energy to solving the problem. But many of them cannot be solved except by an understanding of the spiritual nature of man. And that is what I, as a journalist in Chattanooga, recognize. Man is a soul with a body. We are spiritual beings made in God's image. And so the answers that we have to look for and to propose are accounting for that. And so the work, you've got this legal work where liberty is defended by litigation, let's say under quo warranto, the Latin name for this very wonderful remedy that makes you, the petitioner, represent the state itself, right? You become the state. And the official you're suing, demanding information from, is the defendant, right? He's the defendant, and you are the state. It's a great position to be in, if you ask me. It's pretty exciting. There's that work, and then the other work is what I would call Christian rebuilding, and that is taking the fruits of Christianity and taking the promises of Christianity, which if you had one word, if you maybe had 7 words or so, Christianity could be defined as the change from judgment to grace, right? Or the change from curses to blessings. That's what Christianity is all about. The whole Christian story, which defines history itself, is that very thing. From judgment and cursings and blame to grace and forgiveness. The whole of history is following that trajectory. And you can see it happen in individual lives. If you talk to church people, they will tell you how that works. You talk to Ternay Jordan, for example, at Mount Canaan Baptist Church, or his son. They can tell you how individual people have followed that trajectory from judgment and cursing and self-destruction and lawlessness to blessing, conformity to God's law, serving others, blessings, care, repentance and self-examination for sin. These are all things that create great value. They have a great capital value, right? Capitalism in fact, is based on the operation of those things, not on the operation of those that brought that church goer at Mount Canaan Baptist Church to the church, right? This is David Tulis, and we are glad you're here at AM 1240 and FM 92.7 FM. We cover local economy and the free market, and I'm glad you're giving me just a minute of your time here. David Tulis, brought to you by attorney Clay Whitaker and Jim McCoon. Clay Whitaker, probably the best and sharpest defense attorney and litigator in Chattanooga. I think he is the only one who is certified to be a criminal defense specialist. I think that's his designation. His name is Clay Whitaker. And I argue that you should love your neighbor and buy local. And in that, because we argue that, we need to ask the question now about the committee raised by Andy Berke, the mayor, the Democrat lawyer mayor. He is looking for a new chief of police, as Fred Fletcher will be leaving after 3 years in July. And he says that he did that last time. He had a committee of people advising him on whom to look for, kind of a search committee. And the question for the search committee I would say that Mayor Berke is consistent in the naming of the parties in this committee, is consistent with his election dismissal of my inquiry regarding police reform. There is no police reform in his mind, and he has ignored and is ignoring the Chuck Wexler paper from the Police Executive Research Forum in Washington that came out in July of last year. I've been making a lot of noise about that paper because it will save American lives and needs to be read by members of the committee. Now, I'm trying to have contact with one or two of them. Others I just can't get a hold of, like Bill Cox, the attorney. I just can't get a hold of him. Just don't have his number. So if you, my listener, know Bill Cox and have his number, send me an email, and we can. I want to just ask Bill Cox if he's read this paper by Chuck. Right, it's very important because we want to have for Chattanooga. We don't want the status quo. Police reform is a necessity. It is a necessity because we want to be a prosperous, free city, and we want to be the gig city. I mean, I say that thinking now of city council planning on shooting down the gig city concept. In a blunder, using the science of cartography to shackle the internet. That's the story on city council. Even among the conservatives you think are safe or pro-market, even they do not see their first principles. As David Tulis, the classical liberal of Chattanooga, right? I'm a classical liberal, and I'm suggesting that they wisen up and that they go a little further in their main premises, if they are at all free market. We need to have a police reform candidate in Chattanooga. Now, I say that Andy Berke is not interested on these grounds. Look at the assignees of this task to help him come up with 3 candidates for chief of police. The police department, of course, is an executive branch agency. It executes things. It executes policy. It executes law. Now, there's important pending legal work about which you'll find out nowhere else except with me, David Tulis, at Nooganomics.com. That police question of the use of police is being raised by Basil Marceau, the perennial candidate, and he's going to be running for governor as we would say in the media, a protest candidate. But he doesn't have, of course, he doesn't have party backing, doesn't have funding. He's a very poor man. Who lives in a shabby trailer in Saudi Daisy. 800-8949, 800-8949 is my number. And so Basil is asking questions about the operating authority of police department from the get-go, right? He's not just talking about particular actions as I do. You know, I'm like cherry picking. Like right now we're asking questions about the unmarked cars policy. I've got to do some more mining. And Phil Noblett, the city attorney, deputy, is helping going to answer this question for me. What is the authority for unmarked cars? Because I think this could be a quo warranto action by somebody if we can't get a clear answer on it. But Basil is asking fundamental questions, and the mayor is not. The mayor has assigned, of his 6, 3 people in the search committee who are, I would say, professionally and maybe congenitally favoring the status quo. And they are Bill Cox, a former DA. There is also former U.S. Attorney Bill Killian, the man who planned to enforce the First Amendment against Christians on behalf of Muslims. That's his claim to fame. And then the third one is a General Sessions judge, Christy Sell. So these three are part of the judicial industrial complex. And we'll say, well, how does Judge Sell that? Well, because Sessions Court is the place where many of these criminal cases go to be incorporated rapidly and efficiently into this complex. The inferior courts, which apparently have this jurisdiction, settle 95% of criminal accusations by plea bargain, where the court, no one has to do his job in General Sessions Court because everything's plea bargain. It is a social plea bargain mill, and the peace and dignity of the state, I believe, is strongly compromised by the DA's office there proposing often nefarious plea bargains. And the public defender's office, also a state agency, they're agreeing to put defendants through the mill, agreeing often to ridiculous and awful charges, as in the Antonio Bell case that we have documented here at Nooga Radio and also at Nooganomics.com. So 3 of the 6 on the committee are the status quo. Two prosecutors. I mean, why would you? 2 prosecutors. You want a defense attorney, not a prosecutor, to be on this committee. You want a defense attorney, Mr. Berke, not 2 people whose job is to put people behind bars and to enforce the statute against the common people. Now, you can tell Andy Berke is a progressive. He's a big state progressive, and that is evident in his assignment. So, but the other 3 are not. There is a man who believes in the Lord Jesus Christ and the efficacy of Christ's sacrifice on the cross, and that is Pastor Trinae Jordan of Mount Canaan Baptist Church. Then there's also Chris Ramsey, who is the CEO of TechTown, which is a kind of, it's not a school exactly, but it's kind of it's kind of a training center in the digital direction. So there you have movie making classes for children, programming classes. In fact, my son, 14, will be taking a class this summer for a week in this month at TechTown. It's about $300, and he'll be going there every day for several hours learning some basic programming. Now, the 6th person on the committee is the former chairperson, as she's called, of the Highland Park Neighborhood Association's Safety Committee, and her name is Olga Decline. So you have 3 status quo-oriented members of this panel, including a Sessions Court judge, and then 2 prosecutors. So we have, it seems to be, a prejudice against reform. Now, reform, as in the paper that I've mentioned, is on 4 points. There are 4 areas for reform, and we need to seriously consider that. And you, my listener, need to ask your city council representatives to make a matter of this, because if it's just you and me, if it's just me, there's nothing I can do really except urge you to do something. So you, my listener, if you're in Chattanooga, I would suggest you send a link to your city council member about this study. Look it over yourself, have a couple paragraphs in your letter, your email, and then send the email along and say, please look at this. I think this is important, and I'm concerned that the mayor is going to have another person who thinks that community policing is a sufficient balm and salve to the corrosive power of policing, especially against blacks. Right? Blacks are frequently violated by the policing process. Young black men routinely are harassed. Ars Technica has a story just a couple days ago that is in my stack and continues to sit at the top of my stack until I tell you about it, by David Kravitz. And there's an analysis of 183 hours of transcripts of police encounters from 2014, Oakland Police Department, California, 981 traffic stops. And guess what? White people pulled over are more likely to be called ma'am and sir, and they're more likely to hear words such as thank you and please from the police officer. But blacks don't get that kind of respect. They're likely to be called by their first names, or even my man. Indeed, we find that white community members are 57% more likely to hear an officer say one of the most respectful utterances in our data set, whereas black community members are 61% more likely to hear an officer say at least one of the least respectable utterances in our data set, according to the study. And so that is, whites get deference. I get deference because I'm a Caucasian. I wear the bow tie, and blacks don't. A study of 2012 data indicates that in that year, 55,400 people were hospitalized after police encounters. Police encounters are violent, very often lead to killing. 6.5% of all killings in the United States are by police officers, and this is something we accept if we accept and let our city government accept the mayor's premise of more of the same. We need to have someone who cares about community policing and sort of meeting with gays and Hispanics and that kind of thing. That's not reform. Okay, those are minor band-aids on a large cancer in Chattanooga. This is David Tulis.
The Tennessee Valley's news, talk, and sports leader, Nooga Radio, AM